All right, I am here with John Morley, and we are going to talk about a touchstone. I actually used to call it the compass, but I am now rebranding more around groundbreaking. That when we want to break ground in the world and be really impactful in the world, we first need to focus on ourselves and know who we are and really grow these deep roots. And this idea of having a touchstone, it's almost like a personal strategy or a personal brand. It's something that you just keep coming back to. So we worked on this together with John. And John, I'd love for you to talk a little bit about what inspired you to start this work, to embark on this journey. It was end of last year, I think, when we started.
Yeah. So, hi, Jen. So, thanks. Yeah. I think this came at a point where I'm sure, like a lot of people, either because of the situations over the last year, or either whether it's sort of career related, the role I was in sort of came to an end, let's say, and I had the luxury of sort of having some time that I could sit back and sort of figure out what I wanted to do next. And the more I sat back and thought about it, the more I kind of went, I actually I want a complete reset here. I don't want to go into looking for the next thing the way I've gone into looking for other sort of next things. And when I went back and looked at the most enjoyable work I'd ever done, I always realized that it had been sort of done with people, and in very emergent sort of ways. And I had the good fortune of meeting you and sharing that with you. And you introduced me to the work that you were doing. And I think it was actually your blog, Start With Who, that was sort of the initial light for our conversations.
Yeah. So Start With Who initially came out of my customer-centric strategy work before I started coaching. And then I started realizing the importance of starting with who, starting with ourselves, not just the customer out there, but who are we? And so, yeah, this is what this is all anchored on. So I'd love for you to share your compass. If you want to hit your share screen and talk a little bit about what it includes. And while you're pulling that up, I'll just say that what this draws from is 30 years of customer research or human motivation research into what makes people tick, why we do what we do. And it's typically emotion. Emotion drives behavior. And specifically, it's emotion that's connected to our core needs. And when those core needs are met, how we feel. So this whole exercise is not a cerebral exercise. It's a deeply felt exercise to see what is truly resonant in our bodies.
Yeah, thanks, Jen. And I think one of the things that's really important, and why your message resonated so strongly with me, was that typically I've been somebody who I've worked on some pretty cool emergent things, and when they've, let's say, worked, I've been able to operate off sort of my own sense of perspectives and bring people together around that. But then I've also been in situations where that sort of really hasn't worked, and coming into this work, my sort of lack of confidence around that was, well, is it me? Do I hit it sometimes and not others? And so not having confidence about how you show up, or not having confidence or clarity around why you work in certain ways, was very strong. So that's, you're talking about, what you feel in your body. I think we may go there in this conversation. So that's one of those things that has utterly changed for me. And it started with this touchstone. And so as we walked through the process, which I remember as being actually relatively short, I mean, this was a couple of months. And I just sort of think, if you think of the whole span of your lifetime, let alone your working career, this is a relatively short time frame to get a lot of clarity. So for me, when we went through the process of identifying sort of my primary or sort of core needs, the four that emerged were knowledge, expression, belonging, and growth. And they're sort of the primary sort of large terms here around each of the quadrants. But what I wanted to get into that was as we explored this was a sense that I get a joy out of knowledge, and the value that I associate most strongly with it is ingenuity. I love ingenuity. I love seeing new things or wondering how do they do that, and so it gives me energy. And so that immediately allows me to go up to the next quadrant, which was expression, which is, well, where did that come from? Who came up with that? Who can I share it with? What can I sort of learn from these people? And that's all around sort of communication. So I very quickly discovered that I had this real need for expression, which was built on this knowledge. And it's interesting that as I've gone into this in this last year, I have probably met more people, learned more things, been engaged in more sort of conversations than ever before. And it's been quite literally inspiring. And one of the big things for me was learning that it didn't have to be my knowledge that actually gave me that energy. It was other people's knowledge, which sort of brought me over to that realization as we talked that belonging is a key core need for me. And that sense also of driving that value of inclusion, which is I love seeing potential come to light, even if it's only because it sparks another conversation. But as we started to explore this touchstone, I'm realizing, wow, this is building, the belonging and the inclusion is building on this ability to be able to express and communicate. And if I feel inspired, other people are going to feel inspired, and maybe they're thinking about other things, but that's okay because it's inclusive. So we can sort of I like to use this phrase which I borrowed from a book. It's bend, break, and blend. And that's what we can do together over here when we actually establish trust. And as we went through this journey, Jen, I remember being able to look back at sort of the things that worked and the things that hadn't worked, and realizing, oh my gosh, when it worked, it was because all these three things showed up. And if you sort of go inside the circle here, that's where I think we really started to look at, well, who did I show up as in each of these sort of sectors? And I mean, I did. And in the knowledge area, it was largely showing up as sort of an architect. I ran corporate executive briefing centers for years, which was all about really trying to architect great experiences based on pockets of knowledge. And spent a lot of time talking to customers or talking to people and trying to bring people in, which was the storytelling and sense making pieces. And then this inclusive and belonging piece, well, I do love bringing people together. We might talk about that a little bit later in terms of what it is I'm doing now. And then the final sort of piece of the touchstone and the quadrant was, oh, what is it all about? Is there a destination? And I've never really been a very strong, sort of, I won't say advocate of, but I've never had this very strong vision. It's just this sort of sense that we go on, and it's a constant journey, and it's a constant journey of learning and engaging and trying to build community, I guess, for one of a better term. So this I found was a really great way to almost close the circle here and say, great, because continued growth requires continued learning and continued communication and continued building of these coalitions. And then the more we looked around that, the more I sort of realized, oh, wow, what I'm actually looking at is, and mapping it back onto my particular sort of career path was always being in roles where there was no budget or no headcount, and always looking at that as being a really sort of tough, almost negative thing. And then realizing actually who I am and what I've learned to be actually thrives in those situations. So it was all about unlocking this trapped value. And if I wrap up on this piece, realizing that one of the big ways that I could help inspire other people was helping to almost give them a way to begin to communicate in this way and say, well, look, I don't typically work over here, but I have thoughts on this space. Can I jump in? I go, absolutely. Let's go explore that. And that's, so I hope that gives a kind of a sense of how the conversation emerged and how the pieces come together for me.
Absolutely. So often the same needs will pop up for many of my clients, but the way that they're defined are very distinctive. So it's really helpful to then add these values and add the emotions, because once you start really clarifying the needs in terms of what it means for, what does growth mean for me, or belonging for me versus for you, is actually shows up differently. And that will then affect, even just the archetypes that we use in the middle, as well as the ultimate purpose. So it's a really interesting balance of the me with the we, the individuality that is created, and yet also being able to align on shared needs with other people who value belonging, expression, and so on.
I really like that. It's I have a thought, because I've been lucky enough, right, to talk to some of your other clients, and we have touchstones that are not that dissimilar, and yet we show up very differently. And as I was able to explore that, and I go back down sort of into the knowledge and communication pieces here, part of that was I realized, okay, if I think of that journey from sort of someone who's a great explorer to someone who's a really good sort of orchestrator to someone who's a really good completer finisher, I realized we may have very similar looking touchstones, but we're also different personalities and show up in different places. And so that became this touchstone became something which said, okay, I feel really comfortable with this. This feels like it's given me clarity about how I show up. And then if somebody else shows up with something very similar, but they're a different person altogether, that doesn't cause confusion. What it causes is, well, that's really interesting. So where's our alignment then? And so I just found these were challenges of there were positive challenges rather than negative challenges. And that's something I've taken into everybody I deal with now or work with, is if they're showing up a certain way, I'm super curious about, I wonder what their touchstone might be. And I ask actually quite directly, and I've had an opportunity to share this with a lot of people.
Wow, that's great. Which then brings me to my next question. So the theory around start with who is to start with ourselves, but then start with who also means, who do I work well with? Who might be my clients? Who really lights me up? Who brings out the best in me? And instead of trying to be all things to all people, which I think happens when we don't have a lot of self-clarity, it's, I'll work with anybody. Talk a little bit about how this is kind of narrowed and how this has helped guide you around the people in your work.
Yeah, I think having clarity is, and this will sound like a cliche and I don't mean it to, but having clarity is a fantastic building block for confidence. And so where I'm going with this is that I was always very concerned if I had to come up and deal with an executive, because before we had done this work, my sense was, I don't do well with execs. I'm much rather sort of deal with people sort of below them. And I sort of had framed that for myself as there was a fear element, and look, I'm just better staying below the parapet. But once we did this work and I realized sort of who I am and the joy that I get out of the work I do, I realized that actually that's my natural audience, the people who are the doers and the people who do report up into the execs. And so that reticence to go and talk to executives wasn't based on fear. It was based on sort of an understanding that actually I do my best work with this audience, not with that audience. And so one of the things that has actually shifted for me is that as I sort of look to work with or enable or support or partner with people who I would sort of say are in the middle, or have responsibility for execution, what I've been able to communicate to the executives that they work for is to say, this is my strength. My strength is in working with the people who report to you, the people who are going to put your strategy into action. And that involves a whole lot of things that you as an executive may not actually either have time or interest or knowledge about getting involved in. So I show up as somebody who will willingly, actually really happily engage with that level below and enable the delivery of a strategy. And so I always struggled with that. And I hope that makes sense. I have a sort of a how brain. So a lot of the joy of this touchstone is that clarity of saying, yeah, and this is how comes about. This is how people engage and get excited and feel listened to. And then a lot of that doesn't need to get shared up the line.
which actually leads right into the wheel that you created from the compass. So I'd love to see that. And if you
Yeah,
share
sure.
that.
Thank you. So so this is, and as all these things, this is also in transition a little bit because we're always kind of learning. But if I pop the compass back up there for a second, we'll see sort of knowledge, expression, belonging, and growth. And as I sort of reflected around a lot of the challenges I was looking to help people solve. I mean, first of all, I used to tell, when we started talking first, Jen, I used to say, well, a lot of my career experience was the sort of C-suite above me would come up with a strategy and sort of chuck it over the fence to me, and my job was to go and figure out how to get it to work. And so I had, in this iteration of this, sort of looked at that and say, well, this is classically a complex problem, which is no single perspective can actually see the extent of the challenge we have to solve for. So the sense making piece mapped, I'm going to flick back to the compass here for a second. The sense making piece mapped very much back to the knowledge piece, which is, well, what are we seeing here? And moving over towards our sort of expression and who's seeing it, because we need to be able to bring these different sort of parties together. So that was very much caught in sort of, let's discover the true nature of the challenge by talking to people. And as we learn, we might remix or reframe or repurpose what's happening. And then let's bring people together. And you can see right there it was starting with who. Bring everybody into the tent, and don't start with methods, start with what would they like to see happen? What's valuable for them? What's their intent? And so that was all around sort of embracing diverse points of view. And while it doesn't map exactly quadrant to quadrant, if again I were to go back to the Touchstone, we'd see that sort of embracing diverse points of view is really this belonging piece. And knowing that sort of, if we can find value for everybody, it doesn't have to be the same value, so find value for everybody, that will allow us to tap into the creativity of the group and begin to architect what it is we're going to solve for. So I would sort of call this being practically creative, working with a lot of sort of inquiry, improvising, but also intuition. So that sense of feeling in ourselves that this is the right path forward. And again, wholly built on, practical creativity, right? And everything that's in here, because the goal was, if we could do that, create these right conditions for people to come together, we unlock this tremendous value. So, when we set those right expectations, we're ready to go. And even this language here, the galvanizing, the architecting, these were all things that I felt really good about using, because I now knew that this is how I show up as a person. This is my who. And I think what was amazing about this is, as I worked with you, Jen, on what my approach might be, I thought this would probably take weeks, and it didn't. It took, I think, a day or so just to pull together the initial version of this.
Yeah. So now you're starting to work with organizations to unlock the value, especially complex problems, which is amazing. You had some resistance, as many of my clients do, as I used to have as well, around this idea of going out and doing things that aren't totally comfortable. Because in the old way of doing business, or let's call it the status quo way of doing business, everything is outside of you to go hunt down. The metaphor is like a hunter, and you've got to go get the business and strive, and and one of the key fundamental tenets of how I work and this whole process is trying to reverse that entire flow. So let's talk a bit about how this actually starts showing up for you in practice around, kind of getting anchored on that touchstone.
Yeah, I love this. I literally kind of went goosebumpy when you started talking about that. I think you said it right there. So I'm just going to repeat. There were so many occasions before I started to work with you that I would sort of say to myself, I'd love to do this, or I should do that, but there's some external situation that's preventing me from doing it. And yet I had in my own experience and mind that I'd done some pretty remarkable things with amazing people where the constraints were really tight and we'd been creative and bust outside them. And I kept thinking to myself, yeah, but that was because we had that blend of people, and you don't always have that blend of people. And so it was this constant sense that there was some external like force that was our constraints that were going to hold me back. And two things I think emerged. One was when we did the Touchstone was the first time where I had clarity. I mean, I say this like, this is the first time I had clarity, where I could say, oh, well, let me go have a look at some of the situations that didn't work, because I wasn't actually true to the 4 parts when it didn't work. And if I looked at at projects or initiatives we'd involved in did work, all 4 showed up. So that was the first one where I went, oh, maybe I was just chasing the wrong things, or maybe I was trying to apply the wrong thing and striving to push something where actually I really just wasn't being myself. And so this began to happen. I mean, most recently, I've had somebody, for instance, approach me twice and sort of say, well, I'm building a team. You need to come join the team. And I was like, thank you. And I'm not going to come join your team. And the reason being that I know that what they're building doesn't align with my Touchstone. And the reason that I feel really good about this is because I look at these situations now and I go, if I don't stay true to that, and it's not a very tight, constrained thing, it's a lot of flexibility in there, but if I don't stay true to it, I'm going to run into situations where I'm blocked or where I can't get to do what it is I feel I want to do. Whereas if I rely on the Touchstone, well, all that power is now inside me. And what I found amazing, and then you go, and I'm a big fan of Seth Godin, right? So you go read Seth Godin stuff, and he'll say to you, well, go find that, go talk to that audience that you're born to talk to. And so I've started to do that. And it's great because when you show up to somebody and they're not your audience, that's fine. They're not your audience. And so it doesn't weigh as heavily anymore. I don't feel like, oh, shoot, that call didn't work out. And well, that call, what turned out there wasn't alignment, and that's fine. And I would say the one piece where I'm still sort of getting used to is realizing that just not to strive too hard. Don't push too hard, because you might get a follow-on call or some situation like that. But I've found actually it's been amazing. If I follow the thought, somebody had said to me this year, I had said, oh, I've had this series of uncanny coincidences with people where I've just had these conversations and amazing things have unfolded. And this person said to me, that's not uncanny coincidences. That's just showing up, and that energy comes back to you.
Totally.
And that has been such a turnaround. The pressure just lifts very significantly. And it's not this is the beauty of this. This is not a magic formula, or it's just showing up as you are. Can I just add one other thought, Jen, here? I read something over the weekend that didn't sit well with me at all. It was somebody saying that, we've read a lot about Simon Sinek, right? And Start With Why. And somebody saying, well, if you do that, it turns everybody into very selfish people because they're all showing up for their own, pursue their own purpose. And, and I thought, well, starting with who isn't selfish, and starting with who allows you to come in together and actually begin to build a community, and what it is collectively that we are looking to do, that will emerge. And when it emerges far faster than when you push and push. And that's been my sort of absolute experience.
The way I see this too is that when we are really true to ourselves, it's almost like we create a gravitational pull because we're rooted. This isn't something that's out there. Everything is right here. And it creates this gravity that allows the people that are on your wavelength to show up. And they might also have very different perspectives, but there is something that then is an attractive. And so you're not trying to force fit people who might not be part of or shouldn't be part of that. It's almost like an ecosystem, right? There's a symbiotic relationship with everybody that's in the ecosystem. And the people that don't belong in the ecosystem just don't belong in the ecosystem, right? So having that clarity and confidence and allowing things to come to you and on a basis of resonance, emotional resonance, acts as this, you know, kind of this magnetic force that pulls it all together.
Absolutely. I mean, I'm just thinking, I'm actually going to say there's three things that I've learned in talking with you now that I sort of feel very strongly for myself. One is that sense of feeling that this is the right thing. Two is don't push it too hard. If you have the right people and it feels right, then it will emerge. And the third part of that, and I don't know whether this comes first or whether this comes last or wherever, is that sense that your own agency will see you through. You have that power and intent internally to look at this at any moment in time and say, this feels right or it doesn't feel right.
Yeah. That's powerful.
That is hugely powerful. And actually what's the last thought for you on that one is that the stuff that seems scary isn't as scary when that's your driver.
Yeah.
That's the thing.
Yeah.
Yeah. So I'm
awesome.
Like eternally grateful to you for this piece of work because yeah, it's like light switch. Brilliant.
Amazing. Well, the transformation's been amazing. The clarity is amazing. I can't wait to see what you are creating from here. And I really appreciate you coming on, doing this video, sharing more about just yourself. This is, you know, the touchstone is, this is who I am. And that confidence to say, this is who I am is, to whoever's watching, is fantastic.
Yeah. No, thank you. Thank you. And thank you to anybody who's watching also. I appreciate your time and interest.